What's up, everybody? It's guubums back with another comps video. It's been a minute. I haven't made one on the new patch yet, and I'm doing really well on that right now, reaching top 10. So I figured it's time to make a comps video. So a lot of the old comps that were still viable back then or strong back then are still valuable now. So if like you guys have been kind of like following the old guide, I think for the most part you'd still be doing well. That being said, I think there's been a couple updates to some of the comps and a couple updates to the meta that I think are worth exploring. And yeah, so this is going to be the most standard comp that you guys have seen in pretty much like every comps video so far, just because like it's the most popular one, and I think it really is just like kind of been a mainstay of the meta since the set came out. I think there have been like a couple minor updates to this comp, but realistically, in large, it's played the same way. It's just 4 Trickshot backline plus 4 Bruiser frontline. I think this is the standard comp. Something I have noticed about this comp, especially with the people I've been coaching, generally are like kind of like lower level players, but even in higher challenger and like grandmaster level players, is that like they're way too focused on this like Bruiser frontline. So like obviously, like once again, the traits look really kind of like well set up, so that like it's really easy to get this comp online on 8. But like it's really important to kind of like think about your frontline when you don't have this online. I mentioned it in the past, but like when you're playing around Ink Shadow, there's a lot of the tattoos have a lot of value. So bombardment, force, pretty much anything but the vitality actually has value. So and I'm gonna kind of want to talk about like how to set that up and like kind of how to use them when you're level 8. So the most obvious way to do it is Ornudir. So if you play Ornudir and you don't have like Galio 2 yet, you can drop Story Revert just to play like this front line. Obviously, you're still playing for Trickshot backline. And if it has any of these 5 tattoos, it's going to be really strong. So the only one that's not useful is this Vitality. Functionally, you can just ignore it. Like early game, it's like a couple hundred extra HP on your unit, but realistically, it's not that important. All 3 of these are going to be quite strong on a backline carry. Either it be Kai'Sa or Xayah, it doesn't really matter. But they're all 3 are strong, and Toxin already wounds. So if you don't have a Morello, this is especially powerful. But even if you do have a Morello or Sunfire or Red Buff somewhere, this is still really strong just because it does a lot more damage. I think Fury is the weakest of the 5 by far, and Force is only good on Sylas. So if you're playing around Force, you have to be playing some sort of Sylas version, and then ideally you want to be putting items on him. Here we have Spark and Crown Guard, which are going to be his best items, but pretty much any real Sylas items will do, whether it be AP or tank items are fine. Protection is by far the strongest. I think if you have Protection, then no matter what, you're not even playing 4 Bruiser on 8, you're just always going to be playing 3 Ink Shadow, just because it represents more frontline stats for your team. It's just a completely overtuned item or tattoo, however you want to call it. Bombardment is also really strong. It's the best backliner one. Obviously, Toxin has its niche that it kind of like checks the wound niche, so you don't need to build wound if you play it, but bombardment in general is like the highest total damage, and it doesn't matter really which one you're putting it on between Xayah and Kai'Sa. And another way to get this without, if you don't have Udyr, which obviously is a 5 cost, is playing around Nautilus Jax. So me personally, I play this a lot, but a lot of the people I talk to who are obviously high challenger, or like even right now, I think most of them are actually top 10 on ladder, they don't like playing this Jax Nautilus version. I personally think it's really strong just because Nautilus really helps in the mirror. So if you notice, especially at lower elos, people are really accustomed to kind of like full grouping their backline, because obviously Sivir provides some sort of like benefit to the units that are adjacent to her. So people are like just really trying to greed that the attack speed. Same with Kayle, and they often clump their frontline, and obviously Nautilus is very likely to knock up your entire team. So one of the tips I have for this comp is that you should really not be clumping your backline. For the most part, like this is the position I like to do as a default. Obviously Xayah for the most part is Bard, but this is the positioning I like to do on default, just because yes, your Kai'Sa is getting your Kayle attack speed, which for the most part is your most important unit, and the rest of your team is clumped. So like a lot of clumped based abilities such as Morgana, Hui, and Nautilus are going to be directed towards your I mean, these are not weak units. Teemo and Xayah specifically are very strong, but it's still more important to get them away from your Kai'Sa rather than not. And then that being said, once you have Xayah, it's important, like you can do something like this, or like Xayah 2, I mean, or like an itemized Xayah, you can do something like this, or even just like full spreading your backline. Kayle just hugging these 2 is also fine. It is like somewhat valuable to keep your Last Whisper and Xayah close to each other, obviously because Last Whisper provides value to both your Kai'Sa and your Xayah. So it's like a couple important things to be looking out for, especially after the Morgana buffs. I think clump punishing has been a lot more prevalent in the set, so it's like pretty important to kind of declump your backline. Even your frontline a little bit, it's important to declump, but the problem with declumping your frontline is that if you declump your frontline, then that means if you have a clump to backline, then clump abilities are going to be punishing your backline even harder than, or even more frequently than they otherwise would be. And the 2 best augments for this comp are Lucky Ricochet and Little Buddies. Pretty much unbeatable in terms of value, especially as gold augments. But obviously any generic combat augment is good. I've talked about this a million times, but Combat Caster, Inspiring Epitaph, Unified Resistance, all of these are really generic combat augments that will be very valuable in any comp. This is like roughly the best in slot. I think once again, you could be building Deathblade and Shojin on Kai'Sa and Teemo as you see fit or as it becomes available. But for the most part, these are the items you do want to go for. But once again, the exact best in slot outside of Last Whisper is not going to be all that relevant. And I guess before we get into the next comp, I want to kind of just say, if you guys are liking the content, please leave a like and subscribe, and leave some feedback in the comment section down below for stuff that you do want to see. But yeah, let's just get into the next comp. And we have Ashe. So I have talked about this comp in the past, but back then we hadn't really properly figured out how to play around it yet. Back then I kind of spoke about Ashe being like a really strong carry, but it was difficult to find a dual carry with her. Well, we have since figured out a way to do that. So this comp has been nerfed in 14.9, just very slightly, but it still remains one of the stronger comps in the game with an extremely high cap. So the problem with this comp obviously is that it's very contingent on a lot of 4 costs, as well as requiring a 5 cost to actually, or multiple 5 costs to actually cap out, whereas this one requires Xayah. And I think Kai'Sa without Xayah is significantly weaker than Ashe without Lissandra, right? That being said, Azir is actually the strongest 5 cost for this comp. It's not Lissandra. Little known, I guess, kind of misconception about this comp. But yeah, otherwise this comp is relatively straightforward. Obviously you're capping out with these, but your strongest level 8 board, assuming you have all the pieces, is going to be exactly this. Obviously I have 2 Annies, but you can just treat them as 1 Annie. I just put 2 Annies to kind of like show the different itemization you should be looking for with Annie. So Annie specifically as a tank compared to other tanks in the game right now is very item non-dependent. So she's really broken at using like every single tank item, whereas some of the other tanks in the game, especially like something like Nautilus, you're really just looking for a couple specific items. Annie can use everything. So Warmog and Sterak's most notably are underused items, especially on Annie. These are just like really strong tank items on Annie only, but like Warmog's on most other tanks is really weak, and then Sterak's in general is not really considered a tank item. But Sterak's is a really good kind of outlet for swords in this comp when you've already completed your Ashe items, right? So obviously Ashe best in slot is Rageblade plus Last Whisper plus any damage item. Most of the time it's going to be IE or Deathblade. I believe IE is slightly better, but for the functionally they're the same. So if you have one, you just build one. And then yeah, so once again we're talking about Annie. This comp, it really abuses Porcelain Spat, and ideally it goes on Annie. But I've seen a lot of people kind of like put Porcelain Spat on like Nautilus or even Azir after they've hit their first one. So sometimes you have 2, or sometimes your Annie has 3 items already and you can't put the Porcelain Spat on her. But it's fine to it's actually better to put it on Lilia. So if you have a second Porcelain Spat, or if your Annie doesn't have any slots, feel free to just put that on Lilia, and it's actually going to be really strong once you get some Lilia items. So Lilia items are pretty just like standard. She's definitely much more of a backup carry, but you'll find that she actually does very similar damage to Ashe in a lot of fights. But the problem with Lilia is that her single target damage is really low. So in some fights you actually need the single target. So even though Lilia is doing a lot of spread damage, it's why this comp works really well, just because Ashe and Lilia complement each other really well in terms of like the types of damage they do in terms of like spread versus single target. And then Azir is also providing your team with a lot of frontline. I'd say on 8 most of the time this Azir is going to be in Elune. So Elune just recently got buffed, and we're going to be talking about a comp that uses Elune a little bit later on, but you just play Elune in the slot instead. I'd suggest putting Kog'Maw 1-up just to not steal the attack speed. The way Elune works is that her ability spreads attack speed along the same row of Elune. So if you obviously don't want Kog'Maw taking that attack speed. And another thing is like if Kog'Maw's up here, he's more likely to take damage earlier than Lilia and Ashe, and obviously Kog'Maw's not really he's a full-on trait bot in this comp. Obviously all 3 of his traits are ticked off, but he's completely useless anyway, so it's just go ahead and let that guy absorb some damage for you. And Lissandra generally wants to just be in front of your Ashe to protect it. Obviously if there's a certain melee carries like Kayn, like Gnar, like Lee Sin, kind of attacking your backline either through a wrap or like just kind of like fight RNG stuff, then Lissandra can get them away. Obviously targeting people's main tank with Lissandra is going to be important, and late game you just want to be feeding your Lissandra and Azir with whatever backup items you have. Generally speaking, it doesn't matter which ones they will be. Like obviously you find the best ones that you can. Archangel, Deathcap, generic AP, mana and tank items on Lissandra are very strong, such as like GA, Adaptive Helm, Shojin, Blue Buff, and Knight's Vow. But realistically, you're not going to be able to be that picky with these items, so it's not that big of a deal. Generally speaking, the way to get into this comp is just to like build a Rageblade early. I think this is the only comp outside of maybe Bard kind of that really uses Rageblade right now. So if you're just like playing Rageblade on an early game AD carry, such as like Caitlyn, Sivir, there's not that many backline two cost ones, so like Senna's another one, then you just kind of like can easily transition into this comp. But otherwise it's like relatively straightforward how to get in this comp. There's not that many augments that do particularly well with this comp outside of generic combat augments, as aforementioned Combat Caster, Inspiring Epitaph, and Unified Resistance are all really good, but Porcelain Crust obviously is really strong. The one caveat is that 6 porcelain requires 2 porcelain crests or 2 porcelain emblems to get online, and without that you obviously can't get it. 6 porcelain is like one of the major win cons with this comp, but it's very difficult to get online, so it's not something you should definitely play for. Even just 5 porcelain is really strong for most of the game, so like pretty much don't be too concerned with like having 5 out of 4 porcelain. It's perfectly acceptable. But that being said, when you like say I have a Lux in and I don't have 2 porcelain spots, it's going to be 5, but at level 9 it's very easy to replace Lux with like something of higher value, whether it be like a second Lilia, a Hui, another Annie, like any frontline, another Ornn, or Ornn 2, Nautilus 2, Udyr 2. It doesn't really matter. It's very easy to take out, but obviously this is contingent on you guys having at least 1 porcelain emblem, right? The next comp in the game I have is Duelists. So Duelists are back. Okay, so the most important part, I guess, with this comp compared to like how it used to be played is that it's not very much a reroll comp anymore. I've noticed like a lot of people are still playing this as a level 7 reroll comp, and I think that's like a very weak version of playing it. I think, truth be told, this is probably the second strongest comp in the game. It's definitely like top 3, I would say. So this comp is like extremely strong, and it abuses so many augments. So every augment, every like GG augment you get with this comp is going to kind of like launch your power up a certain stage, and then obviously if you have like 3, the chance that you win the game is like extremely high. So how do we play this comp? Because it changed quite a bit. First and foremost, we're going level 8. We're not sitting in 7 and rolling for Volibear 3, Tristana 3 anymore. It's just really bad to do so. If you are rolling for a 3 cost, or sorry, a 3-star, the strongest one is to go for is Qiyana. I personally, when I play this comp, I'm holding every single Qiyana throughout the game, and I'm going for a 3-star on 8. I know the odds on 8, someone in the comments is going to say, oh, the odds on 8 are so bad, why wouldn't you just roll on 6? Well, part of the reason is because when you go level 8 versus level 6, is that you have 2 extra units you can fit in, as well as you can hit Aurelia odds, you can hit Lee Sin too, and it's just so much better in general. Do not go for Qiyana 3 on 6 unless you have a very good reason to do so. Most of the time you will not, so just hold every Qiyana and then try to hit it on 8. At 8, I believe the odds are still 20%, so it's not like out of this world to have a 3-star Qiyana on 8. It's like certainly possible, especially if you're holding every single copy you get given. That being said, Qiyana 3 is not like a necessity to playing this comp. It's just the strongest 3-star in the comp. It is stronger than both Tristana and Volibear. And then speaking of Volibear, Volibear sucks. I see people still going for like BT Titans Volibear. It's a terrible build. Like I've seen this in High Challenger, and these people are like straight up playing it wrong. It's like pretty much they're making the comp look bad because they're playing it really poorly. Like you don't want to be indexing on Volibear very hard right now. Volibear and Tristana are like excellent stage 1 and stage 2, stage 3 units, but their scaling is kind of like limited, especially Volibear. Pretty much you just want to be putting utility tank items on Volibear. Crown Guard, as we kind of like spoke about way back in patch 1, is really good Volibear item, even back when Volibear was OP, but now it's like even better just because like he's not going to be kind of like your main DPS or like main like forever tank. He's just going to be relatively tanky while still providing some value in your team because it obviously soaks a lot of damage, has some CC, and still does some damage. So the main way to play this comp is to actually go to level 8 and play for Lee Sin. Lee Sin has been buffed since the last time this comp was really powerful, and Lee Sin is an extremely strong unit, playable in almost all boards right now. And with items, with best in slot items, he's going to be significantly stronger. Obviously, he has his vertical trait checked out as well, which makes him even more powerful. So you just want to be building like standard bruiser melee items on Lee Sin. Lee Sin's not a unit that you guys are really unfamiliar with probably, just because he's been a unit that's really powerful. We're going to be talking about him again in the next comp. So like we already know how to play this comp, BT Titan Sterak's, but realistically almost any items actually work on him. You can actually build him tank as well, but ideally, like if you could choose your items, you do want to go like BT Titan Sterak's. QSS is another really strong one. Going double BT is perfectly fine. Double Titans is perfectly fine. Edge of Night is perfectly fine. IE is fine. Pretty much Lee Sin can use so many items. Pretty much between Volibear and Lee Sin being able to hold every item in the game, except for like pure AP items like Death Cap, this comp is really powerful for item economy, just because yes, you do want to have a lot of swords and a lot of bows, but because they can use so many, it's just like even if you don't end up getting the exact components and the exact items you need, they're still really strong. And then as for Qiyana 3, I think her best item is going to be TG. But in the case of you don't have TG and you have a Qiyana 3, then you're going to want to itemize her with like, once again, standard melee, bruiser type items. GA being her best item, but BT, Edge of Night, sorry, BT, Titans, Last Whisper are all going to be quite strong. Tristana uses the same items that she always has. Hurricane, Last Whisper, red buff. Aurelia, Morello, same stuff, right? Pretty much, there's so many augments that are broken with this comp, I can almost like not really name all of them. First and foremost, the combat ones are extremely broken. All the support item augments, rather, tend to be really strong. Obviously, you can't always guarantee that you get the support item that you're looking for, but a lot of them are very strong. Duelist Crest, Keepers are insane. Extended Duel is another one. Unified Resistance specifically. Combat Augments, once again, as the aforementioned ones, are extremely strong. Even something like Heavenly Crest is pretty reasonable in this comp. It's not the best, but it's pretty good. Yeah, and I don't know. This comp just uses so many good combat augments, and there's a lot of augments that you can just like open the game with 2-1 and just hard force Duelists. Keepers is one of them. Obviously, all the Duelist specific augments are another, but yeah, it's just this comp is just really strong right now. And I think, truth be told, for I guess the average player watching this video, this is is going to be the comp that you should be playing the most. I don't know how popular this comp is in lower elos. It's getting slightly more popular in higher elos, but if this comp is not popular at the elo bracket you're playing in, you definitely need to be playing it. It's just so broken and so easy to pilot that as so long as you're like kind of listening to what I'm saying and not building BT Titans Volibear, yeah, you're probably going to be doing well with this comp. And gold level 8, that's another important thing. But yeah, okay, on to the next comp. Okay, so this is a comp you guys have seen like multiple times already in some form or another, whether it be YONE or Kayn. Realistically, you guys have seen it. They made a change to Heavenly, which was pretty much, technically speaking, a strict nerf, but it doesn't matter. It's just strong now. The only, I guess, like adaptation made to this comp is that now Heavenly Crest, which is obviously the second strongest or first to second strongest augment you can get at any given augment, 2-1, 3-2 or 4-2 with this comp, is going to be extremely strong. Now you just have to put it on Lee Sin or Kayn depending on which one is your off carry. So I find that the mistake a lot of people make when they play this comp is that they're just building Edge of Night and hard forcing Kayn. But say you have like Chain, Cloak, and Sword, people are building Edge of Night and hard forcing Kayn. A better way to go about that is to build BT Titans, and then that way you can play BT Titans on either. Obviously, like, sure, maybe in an ideal scenario you want to have Edge of Night on Kayn 2, and that's going to carry our game. But that being said, you're not always guaranteed to hit Kayn 2, and you're certainly not always guaranteed to hit Kayn 2 before you have Lee Sin 2. And because these two are like functionally very similar strengths as carries, it doesn't really matter who you itemize. But the more important thing is that like your upgraded one or your main one is itemized as best as possible. So the reason why I bring that up is one, because that's an important thing to think about, but also is because this Heavenly Crest, the way they changed Heavenly is that the actual Heavenly units are benefiting a lot more from the Heavenly trait than pretty much like the side units, in which case Kayn and Lee Sin would be. So putting Heavenly Crest on your off carry, whoever you have 2 items on or whoever you have unupgraded, is going to be kind of like the adjustment or the adaptation to how to play this comp. But yeah, like because GA is not good on Lee Sin, it's just important not to like over greed GA. So BT Titans is like best in slot on both of them, so you might as well just be building BT Titans instead of GA. Obviously in an ideal scenario, say you have like Not Today, I believe it's called Not Today, then like this gives you a free GA and you can put that on Kayn and you're off to the races in that case. But like because GA is not that good on Lee Sin, it's just being able to build items that fit on either of them, so you can just like account for whichever one you have upgraded first, is going to be the more important way of looking at the itemization in this comp. Last Whisper can go on both of them. It is slightly better on Kayn, but doesn't matter. Hodge is excellent on both of them. For the most part, they're using the same items. The only adaptation I would make is that GA is not that good on Lee Sin, so don't over prioritize it. It is still really good. That being said, Lee Sin also uses a much higher variety of items than Kayn does. Kayn essentially needs his top 7 items to actually be powerful. These 3 are obviously among them: Titans, Hodge, Giant Slayer. Pretty much any AD carry item is going to be good on him as well, whereas like Lee Sin can use like 20 items, which obviously gives him significantly more flexibility, which is another reason why we're stacking Kayn over Lee Sin, is because Lee Sin can kind of be very effective despite not having best in slot, whereas like Kayn cannot. So, and then finally we're just rounding out Morgana with just like, you know, your standard blue Morello. You're capping around Irelia and Wukong mostly, just fitting them in. Same idea as with Duelists. This comp really excels at having a Qiyana 3. So if you actually have Qiyana 3, say before you have one of these 2 upgraded, you can actually just play Qiyana 3 and just like ditch Kayn altogether. Fuck Kayn, and then we just play Qiyana and we're just chilling, right? It's really good to kind of just do that. Most of the time you won't have Qiyana 3, but obviously it's just an option. It's something I've done, and I pretty much won the game with like 80 HP just because I had a pretty early Qiyana 3. Never hit Kayn, never played around Kayn, and it doesn't really matter. So yeah, you're capping around Ornn and, Wukong and Irelia. It's important that like to know that because Ornn is so broken, you can pretty much play him on any comp. You are already getting Behemoth with it. I find people like they have like an Ornn 2 and they'll like sell it for like Nico 2 because the comp guides tell them to play Nico. It's like, if you have Ornn 2 while rolling for this comp, just pick it up, and it's, you know, he's so broken that like, and he also gives you an item on one of your carries, and he can hold all your tank items, and he actually tanks instead of like Nico and Malphite, who if you like give tank items to, they tank for an extra 1 second. It's like if you give tank items to an Ornn 1, they'll out tank like a 3 item Nico 2. And then if you give like 3 items to Ornn 2, they'll out tank your entire team by like 50 seconds. So it's like, yeah, I don't know, just pick up Ornn on every board, but like this board specifically uses it a lot more, and I find that like almost nobody does that. I don't really know why. Yeah, so I don't know, that's just like something I felt like I should throw in. Otherwise, like Divine Rolls, completely broken augment with this comp. It's the best one, and then Heavenly is like the second best, but Heavenly is also really good on 3-2 and 4-2, whereas Divine Rolls is like only good on 2-1 and 3-2, because you can't get it on 4-2. So finally, we have Sylas Flex comps. It's actually interesting. So before the most recent tournament, this comp got a lot of traction because one of my study partners, Mismatch Socks, was actually playing this a lot and climbed like 300 LP to, I think, rank 4 at the time maybe with this comp, and people were like looking up his match history and like realizing this was really strong. This is actually a comp I workshopped with him kind of like a week or two prior to that, and I was playing this a lot. I played it a couple games on stream, and I was going like 1-1-1 with it. It's really strong. It's not exactly easy. I'd say like this is a comp you should probably shy away from if you're kind of newer to the game, just because like I think it's like a lot more complicated than all the other comps I talked about. But that being said, it's like really strong still. So I don't know. It's definitely worth like thinking about. There's so many options to play with this comp. Like I put the kind of like standard 7-ish units you should be playing on 8, which is like 4 Bruiser plus 3 Sage. It's just like playing Sage, Bruiser, Flex. But because like it makes use of so many other random units, Lilia and like Annie is like an option you can play. And then like if you have Shojin, you just put it on Lilia. Lilia, who's a 50 mana unit, treats Shojin as a 3 auto to cast, because with the 2 Invoker in, she has like functional like 45 mana. So with Shojin, it's 3 autos to cast. Whereas with 2 Invoker and you put blue buff is still 4 autos to cast. So Shojin's actually better on that in that scenario. So yeah, that's like a flex setup you can play. Obviously, you don't always have to play 4 Bruiser. I'd say in general, 4 Bruiser is like a pretty weak trait. It's just that like obviously these two are so accessible, Riven and Aatrox, while also having really good synergies. Riven and Galio being a trait twin, which gives you Story Weaver, and you're always playing Zara anyway. It's just like really easy to kind of like have this board set up. There's not that many specific augments you should be looking for with this comp. I just put Fully Adapted and Crown Guard, just because when you have those, your Sylas becomes a lot stronger. Spark Crown Guard is the best in slot. Morello somewhere. Obviously, if you don't have Spark, you should be looking for Shiv. Shiv is good on any of the backliners. And then with the Morgana buffs, this comp is actually got buffed relatively, but because Sylas is still as contested as always, it's just really difficult to kind of like hit all the units for this comp. I like to think about this comp as like it's like AP Kaisa, and it's like AD Sylas. Like you're playing AD, but you're still like pretty much playing around Sylas, because Sylas is like probably the best unit on this build except for Zaya. Sylas is just a better unit than Kaisa and Galio. So you're still really kind of just playing around Sylas. This is the same idea. It's like you're just playing around AP Sylas. It's like all these units are buffing up your Sylas to some degree. They're obviously providing some sort of backline DPS for you. Zaya is an extremely strong 2-cost unit that can carry your items for like most of the game in general. So yeah, this is insane. And then you're capping out around like, there's just so much stuff to cap around with. It's really difficult to like talk about all of them, and it's really difficult to talk about like all the different scenarios you'll find yourself in where you can like play all these types of different units. But obviously, like for the most part, you're just really capping out around 5 costs, right? Like you have an Azir, so you play Azir. And then the standard like cap out-ish comp is like you drop some of these bruisers, like these worthless ones. Maybe you keep Aatrox around for a trade bot, because Galio without items isn't really providing you with much. So we drop Galio in that case, and keep Riven for Altruist. And then I don't know, there's so much stuff to like talk about that like it's just really kind of hectic. And then you play Soraka Rakan, you get 3 Altruists. This is a really standard kind of like cap out package you can play as Wukong, Rakan, and Soraka. It gives you Heavenly, Sage, Wukong. You get Sage with Wukong with the other units, and then you're playing Rakan and Soraka for Altruist. Obviously, Riven gives you Altruist. This gives you Sage. So even if I take out Hui, you'll notice that like the synergies I'm getting look really clean, right? Obviously, Hui is another really good capo unit. Obviously, your entire team is getting a lot of AP from Sage. That's just how it works. So Hui is being pretty effective. I think last patch, you'd be pretty much selling Morgana 2 for Hui 1. Only with this comp, mind you, but in this comp you would do that. You're not really doing that anymore. Morgana after the buff is really strong. Ideally, you just have like items on Hui anyway, say from like late game carousels or items or encounters, stuff like that. Yeah, this comp is pretty complicated, but it is strong enough. I hope I explained like somehow to play it a little bit, but I think, okay, I shouldn't trick you guys into like thinking this comp is like overcomplicated. It's still a really strong comp, and you should be playing it. Just because you have availability, so many options available to you, it doesn't actually matter, because the core of the comp still remains pretty standardized. It's just to kind of like get the max value out of this comp, you will have to be like evaluating all these different options to some degree based on what you're hitting on your level 8 and level 9 roll downs. So yeah, that's the video. I hope you guys liked it. I'll be releasing 2 other kind of like comps videos soon. Like this one didn't have any reroll comps, so the other ones will, and there's going to be 1 comp specific video that I'll also release about kind of like probably the strongest comp in the game. So look out for that. This is just a little bit of a teaser, I guess. And otherwise, you guys can find all my socials down in the description below, Twitch and Twitter specifically. I'm also running a giveaway on my Twitter right now for a CHIBI YONE. If you guys are interested in that, you guys can follow my Twitter and kind of like look to get a chance at winning that. I'll also be giving away a CHIBI YONE in this video or in all my other videos. Just like leave a comment, and I'll just pick 1 comment from any of the videos to just like win a CHIBI YONE code. And it's all regions, so anyone can participate as long as you leave a comment. I don't know, leave something constructive, something funny, doesn't really matter. Tell a story, doesn't really matter, and you'll be qualified to win. All right, until next time, peace.